The desert was not silent. It never truly was. The wind spoke in low whispers through the mesquite trees, carrying dust like a veil across the horizon. Ravens wheeled above the cliffs, their calls sharp and restless. And yet, on that late summer evening, there was another sound, a thin, desperate wail, a human cry that did not belong to the birds or the wind. It came from the edge of the burial ground. The people had gathered earlier that day to bury a woman, young and gone too soon, her name carried in whispers but not in songs. She had lived on the fringe of the band, not fully belonging, not fully trusted, her ancestry marked by outsiders' blood. When she died giving birth, many chose silence instead of grief. Her body was wrapped and placed in the earth with the rituals owed to the dead, but the child she left behind was not given the same grace. The baby lay swaddled in a torn blanket, placed beside the burial mound as though it too had been sent away with her. Its cries split the air, sharp and helpless, and still no one touched it. The elders stood at a distance, their faces grim and unmoving. Women passed by quickly, heads lowered, some muttering prayers, others spitting into the dust as though to cast away bad spirits. Even the men avoided looking too long at the bundle. The child was marked, they said, cursed with the misfortune of its mother's death and the taint of blood not wholly Apache. To bring it into the lodge, to feed it, would invite misfortune. So the child cried, and no one moved, except him. Koa stood at the edge of the circle, taller than most, his shoulders carved with years of labor beneath the sun, his eyes dark and unreadable. He was not an elder, not yet a leader, but the others looked to him often because he carried silence like a weapon. He had not spoken all through the burial, his gaze fixed not on the mound, but on the child that everyone else refused to see. Now, as the last light faded behind the ridges, the wailing grew softer, hoarse, almost fading. A decision hung in the air like a blade, and Koa, who had not moved all day, finally stepped forward. Gasps rippled through the gathered people. He crouched by the burial mound, his hand steady as he brushed dust from the edge of the blanket. The baby squirmed weakly, its tiny face streaked with tears, its lips trembling. Koa's jaw tightened as he looked down. He had seen death, war, hunger, but this quiet abandonment of life still breathing, it cut deeper than all of that. He lifted the child. The crowd hissed as though he had touched fire. A few men stepped forward, half in protest, half in disbelief. "You bring misfortune," one muttered. "Leave it to the earth," another said. Koa rose to his full height, the bundle pressed against his chest. His silence carried weight heavier than any words. He did not argue, did not plead. He simply turned his back to the burial ground and walked away. The people did not follow. That night, Koa brought the baby to the small lodge at the edge of camp where he lived alone. He had no wife, no children by choice. He had long believed that bonds made men weak, that ties could be used against them. But as he set the infant down on a woven blanket, he felt a strange heat stir in his chest. The child's cries softened, soothed by the warmth of his body still lingering. Koa stared at it for a long time. Its eyes were dark as the desert at night, its skin flushed from its tears. It was small, fragile, powerless, but still alive, still fighting to breathe. He could not leave it, and he knew what that meant. The others would not forget. By taking the baby in, he had set himself apart, defied the words of elders, spat on whispers of curses. Already he could feel the eyes that would follow him, the suspicion that would grow. He would carry this choice like a mark upon his back. But when the baby's tiny hand curled around his finger, holding it with surprising strength, Koa did not regret it. The days that followed were difficult. He had never cared for an infant before. He sought goat's milk from a neighboring family, their matriarch giving it to him reluctantly, muttering about bad omens even as she handed the clay vessel over. He fashioned a small skin to feed the baby, clumsy but functional. He rose in the night when it wailed, paced the floor until its cries quieted. He learned the rhythm of its breaths, the weight of it in his arms, the way silence returned when he hummed low in his chest. And the camp noticed. They spoke in whispers, but whispers traveled quickly. Some called him foolish, others reckless. A few admired his courage, though they said little aloud. Children lingered near his lodge, curious, daring each other to peek inside at the forbidden child. Women shook their heads, muttering prayers as he passed. but one pair of eyes lingered longer than the rest. Naich, the daughter of an elder, was not like the others. She watched Koa when he carried the child, her gaze sharp, questioning, almost defiant. She had always been outspoken, her spirit untamed like the horses she rode. And though she said nothing, her silence was not like the others. It was not rejection, it was curiosity. Koa noticed. He told himself it did not matter. He told himself the baby was enough burden, enough danger. But still, when Naich's eyes met his across the firelight one evening, he felt something stir that he had long buried. Something as dangerous, perhaps, as the child in his arms. The desert night was cold, and the stars stretched wide overhead. The baby slept at last, curled against Koa's chest. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, listening to the crackle of burning wood. He knew this was only the beginning. The desert had a way of carrying secrets. Words spoken softly at dusk could ride the wind and find ears not meant to hear them. By the third night after the burial, Koa knew his choice had already taken root in every corner of camp. The whispers followed him. He heard them at the river when he bent to fill his jug, the women drawing water beside him shifting away, voices lowered but sharp. The child is cursed. He should have left it. Now the spirits will turn from him. He heard them in the hunting grounds when he tracked deer through the mesquite and returned with fresh kill. The men who once nodded respect now avoided his eyes, muttering about defiance, about arrogance. And yet, in the silence of his lodge, the baby did not care for curses or omens. The baby only cried when hungry, laughed sometimes in hiccuping bursts, and slept with tiny fingers tangled in Koa's hair when exhaustion overtook him. Life, stubborn and unbroken, refused to bow to superstition. Still, the strain weighed heavy. He had begun to call the child Ayali, meaning spirit song, though he never said it aloud outside the lodge. Giving the baby a name was another act of defiance, one the elders would scorn if they knew. Names carried power, and in Koa's heart he believed Ayali deserved one as much as any other. But it made him restless, because naming meant belonging, and belonging meant danger. One evening, as the fire pits flared across camp and drums echoed faintly in the distance, Koa stepped into the circle of light with Ayali tucked against him. He needed goat's milk again, though each request felt heavier than the last. The matriarch who had given it before now crossed her arms, refusing him outright. "I will not feed a curse," she said, her voice loud enough for others to hear. "You bring darkness into my lodge if you ask again." The others nodded, satisfied by her firmness. Koa said nothing. His silence was not agreement, but steel. He turned without a word and walked back, Ayali stirring restlessly in his arms. But he did not make it far before a voice cut through the air. "I will give you what you need." Naich stepped forward. The firelight caught in her long dark hair, her eyes unflinching. She held a clay vessel in both hands, filled with milk she had gathered from her family's goats. The crowd stirred, whispers rising like sparks. The daughter of an elder, breaking with tradition to aid him, it was a crack in the wall of silence the others had built around him. Koa met her gaze. For a moment, the firelight between them felt like a line drawn in the dust, one step, and she too would be marked. "You should not," he said, his voice low, the first words he had spoken in days. Her chin lifted, proud, stubborn. "And yet I will." She placed the vessel in his hands. Her fingers brushed against his, warm, deliberate. The contact was fleeting, but it carried weight, more than a gesture of help, a choice. The whispers grew sharper behind them, like knives cutting the air. But Naich did not falter. She turned her back on the crowd and walked away, her stride steady, as if daring anyone to stop her. Koa stood rooted, Ayali against his chest, the vessel heavy in his hand. Something unspoken had shifted tonight, not just in the camp, but in him. Later, when Ayali fed and finally slept, Koa sat by the fire outside his lodge, the stars sharp above. He replayed Naich's words in his head, the way her eyes had not wavered. He had known her for years, had seen her laugh with the other young women, ride horses with a wildness that made elders shake their heads. But never had she looked at him as she had tonight, like she understood, or maybe like she dared him to let her understand. Dangerous, that was what it was. If the baby was already a weight on his shoulders, Naich was fire. To reach for her, even in thought, was to invite more scorn, more suspicion. And yet, his chest tightened with something he could not name when he remembered her voice. He closed his eyes, forcing the thought away. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself the baby was enough. But silence did not erase the memory of her fingers brushing his. Days passed. Life in camp moved forward, hunts, councils, prayers, dances, yet always Koa felt the eyes. Always he carried Ayali close, his arms protective, his silence defiant. One night, as he returned from the river, he saw movement by his lodge. A figure slipped into the shadows, quick as a fox. His hand went instinctively to the knife at his belt, but when he pushed open the door flap, Ayali lay untouched, sleeping softly. Still, the air felt charged. Someone had come too close. He sat awake until dawn, knife resting on his knee, his eyes fixed on the child's rising and falling chest. The baby stirred only once, reaching out blindly, and Koa's hand was there, steady, grounding. And in that moment, as the first light touched the desert, Koa knew this child was not a curse. This child was the truest thing he had, and he would fight anyone who tried to take it. But even as he thought it, another memory burned through his mind, Nature's voice. I will give you what you need. The danger was no longer just from the camp. The danger was also within him, rising, restless, undeniable. The camp was never silent. Even in the still hours between moonrise and dawn, there were the faint sounds of horses shifting, the low hum of wind against the canyon walls, the distant cry of a night bird. Yet for Koa, the world had never felt lonelier. It had been weeks since he took Ayali into his care, and the boy had grown stronger. His cries were no longer the frail whimpers of a forsaken infant, but the healthy wails of a child who demanded to be heard. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, Koa thought the boy's voice carried a defiance that matched his own. But every sound drew attention. Every laugh, every cry, every moment the child revealed himself to the camp was a reminder that Koa had crossed a line no one else dared approach. And the whispers did not die. On the morning of the summer solstice, the people gathered for the sunrise dance. It was a time of balance, of honoring the spirits who gave life to earth and water, of gratitude for survival through another harsh season. The drums beat low and steady as the dancers prepared, their bodies painted, their movements solemn. Koa stood at the edge, Ayali swaddled in a blanket across his chest. He felt the stares before he saw them. Mothers clutching their children tighter, men turning their backs as he passed, the elders, seated in a semicircle, not bothering to hide their disapproval. Still, he did not bow. He joined the circle, silent but present, Ayali's breath warm against his skin. It was then Nature appeared. Her face was painted in white clay, her hair braided with feathers that caught the first rays of dawn. She carried herself with a quiet fire, every step deliberate, her presence commanding without effort. And when her gaze found Koa, it did not flinch. The dance began, the people moving as one. Yet Koa felt as though he stood apart, his heartbeat clashing with the rhythm. Ayali stirred against him, eyes blinking open at the pounding drums, tiny hands reaching upward as though to touch the sound itself. Nature passed near him in the circle. For the briefest moment, her hand brushed the blanket where Ayali lay. The touch was feather-light, hidden in the movement of the dance, but Koa felt it as though it burned through his chest. No one else seemed to notice, but he did. After the ceremony, as people dispersed, Nature approached him openly. She did not care for whispers, not today. "You should not carry him so boldly," she said softly, though her eyes held no judgment. "There are those who believe the spirits will turn if he is part of our ceremonies." Koa's jaw tightened. "The spirits see more clearly than men. If they condemn me, let them strike me down themselves." Her lips curved, not in mockery, but in something close to admiration. "You are stubborn, and you are reckless," he countered. "Standing with me so openly will turn their whispers on you." "They already whisper," she said simply, "but their voices do not guide my steps." The words lingered between them. Ayali cooed then, wriggling in his blanket, and Nature reached to adjust the fabric where it had slipped. Her fingers were gentle, practiced, almost as if she had done it 100 times before. "You named him," she murmured, eyes on the baby. Koa stilled. "How do you know?" "The way you look at him, it is not the look of a man carrying a burden. It is the look of one carrying something precious." Her voice softened. "What name?" He hesitated. names were sacred. To speak it aloud to her felt like crossing yet another line, but the truth pressed against his lips. Ayali, he said at last, the word low, steady. Spirit song. Her gaze lifted, meeting his, and there was something in her eyes that made his chest ache. Ayali, she repeated, the syllables delicate on her tongue. A name worthy of being carried. The boy laughed then, as if in agreement. And Koa, who had been silent for weeks, who had kept his walls high and unyielding, felt something shift inside him. But the world was not blind. Later that evening, Koa was summoned to the council fire. The elders sat waiting, their faces hard, their voices sharper than the flames that cracked between them. You defy tradition, one said. You defy the spirits. You invite death upon us, another added. This child is not yours, a third spat. He should have been left. Koa stood tall, Ayali in his arms, his silence louder than any protest. At last, the eldest of them, gray-haired and weary, spoke. You are a warrior of this people, Koa. You have fought with honor. But this act sets you against us. Release the child to the earth and walk free. Or carry him and carry exile with him. The fire snapped, sending sparks into the night. Koa looked down at Ayali. The boy's dark eyes stared back, unblinking, trusting, and he knew his answer before he spoke it. I will not abandon him, Koa said, his voice low but steady. If exile is my path, I walk it without fear. The council erupted, voices rising, anger spilling like storm water. But Koa turned his back, walking away from the fire, the baby pressed to his chest. In the shadows beyond, a figure waited. Naich. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes burned. She did not speak, not yet. But Koa knew in that moment, whatever path he had chosen, she was already walking beside him. The desert had a way of swallowing sound. By morning, when Koa rose from restless sleep, the echoes of the council's fury seemed distant, like a storm already past. Yet the weight of their words pressed on him as heavily as the sun. Exile, the word had a sharpness to it, a cutting edge. Among the Apache, exile was worse than death. Death came with honor, with the promise of walking among ancestors. Exile meant being stripped from the people's memory, nameless, rootless, a spirit wandering without a place. He wrapped Ayali more tightly in the blanket and stepped outside. The camp's eyes turned as one. Men sharpening arrows paused mid-motion. Women stirring pots fell silent. Even children, usually quick to shout and laugh, hushed at the sight of him. Koa's shoulders did not bow. He carried himself with the same quiet strength he had in battle, though inside his chest a storm beat against his ribs. Ayali squirmed, a soft sound breaking the silence. It was that small cry, the ordinary, fragile sound of a child, that cut sharper than all the stairs. For it reminded Koa why he could not bend. Still, isolation grew heavier by the day. No one shared their fire with him. No one offered food or words or even acknowledgement. His only company was the baby's unsteady breath, the desert winds, and, when shadows grew long, Naich. It was near dusk when she came again. He was kneeling by the river, washing Ayali's blanket when she appeared on the far bank. Her figure was outlined in the red light of sunset, her presence unmistakable. You risk much coming here, he said without looking up. Her voice carried across the water, soft but certain. So do you. She crossed the river easily, barefoot, her skirt lifted to keep the hem dry. The current tugged at her ankles, but she moved with the steadiness of someone who had walked this path many times. When she reached him, she knelt beside him without hesitation. Together, in silence, they rinsed the cloth. The water carried dust and dirt downstream, swirling away like the weight of unspoken words. At last, Naich spoke. They will not relent, you know this. Koa's jaw tightened. Then I will leave when they cast me out. Her gaze flicked to Ayali, who slept in a shallow basket by the reeds. And if they do worse than cast you out, he met her eyes then, fierce, unyielding. I will fight, for him. The river gurgled between them. Naich's expression softened, though her voice was edged with something dangerous. You have always carried burdens no one else would, but this one, this child, it is more than even you can carry alone. Then why do you stand here? Koa asked quietly. Why risk their whispers for me? Naich hesitated, her fingers trailing in the current. Because someone must. That night, Koa returned to his lodge to find a small bundle waiting at the flap. Dried meat, ground corn, a pouch of herbs. Enough to last several days. No name, no note, but he knew. Nate. He lifted the bundle in silence, his chest tight with a mix of gratitude and fear. She had crossed another line tonight. If anyone discovered her hand in this, she would face the same threat of exile. And yet, she did it anyway. As Ayali fed and drifted to sleep, Koa sat watching the flames of his small fire. He tried to tell himself it was pity that moved her or duty, but the memory of her eyes, steady, burning, unwavering, told him otherwise. This was not pity, it was choice, and it terrified him more than exile ever could. The next day, the elders sent word. He was to appear before them one final time, his fate decided. Koa carried Ayali with him, walking through the center of camp as the people parted like reeds before a storm. The council fire blazed higher than before, its crackling heat matching the sharpness of the voices waiting for him. The eldest rose, his staff striking the earth. "You have been given time to release the child. You refuse, so hear this. When the sun sets tomorrow, you no longer belong to us. You will walk from this place and you will not return." The words rang like iron. Final, absolute. Ayali stirred in his arms, as if sensing the weight of the decree. Koa's grip tightened, but his face betrayed nothing. "I will go," he said simply. A murmur swept the circle, some with satisfaction, others with unease, but no one stepped forward to stop the sentence. Koa turned and walked into the shadows, the fire at his back. And once more, beyond the reach of flame and fury, Nate waited. Her voice was low, urgent. "You cannot leave alone." Koa stopped, the desert wind pulling at his hair. "If you come with me, you will lose everything." She stepped closer, eyes fierce, her words steady as stone. "Then let me lose it." His heart stumbled. For the first time in weeks, his silence cracked, not with defiance, but with something softer, more dangerous. "Nate," but she only shook her head. "You carried a child when no one else would. Do not think you will carry exile alone." The fire from the council glowed in the distance, but between them, a different fire had taken root, one that no exile could extinguish. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm, like a heartbeat that faltered and sped again. Every glance between Alina and Kai was fire waiting to catch, and yet they both stepped around it like dancers afraid of the flame. It wasn't just fear of discovery, it was something heavier, like the land itself watching, measuring, deciding what price to demand for this closeness. At dawn, Alina carried water from the river with the other women, her hands raw from the coarse clay jars. She kept her eyes lowered, aware of Kai across the clearing, splitting cedar logs for the cook fires. His movements were sharp, steady, deliberate, his back strong, his shoulders glinting with sweat. She didn't have to look long to feel it in her stomach, a coil of want so fierce she nearly stumbled. That night, the fire circle gathered for a healing ritual. One of the elders had fallen sick, and the medicine man prepared chants to call strength into his body. Alina sat on the edge of the circle, the rhythmic drums vibrating against her ribs. Across from her, Kai knelt with his head bowed, his profile cut in firelight. The chant rose higher. Sparks from the flames twisted upward into the black sky. Alina's gaze locked with Kai's for a fraction too long, and something in her chest cracked open. She couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. He didn't either. Later, when the fires had dimmed and the camp lay in shadow, Alina walked alone beyond the outer ring of lodges. The moon had risen fat and low, washing the desert brush in silver. She wrapped her shawl tighter and told herself she was only looking for air, for space. But her heart already knew she wasn't alone. Kai stepped from the shadows, quiet as a stalking wolf. His presence was a tide pulling her toward him. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her voice trembled not with fear but with something more dangerous. "You came first," he answered, his voice low, rough with restraint. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with the sound of their breathing and the night wind. Alina tried to summon her usual armor, the walls of caution and duty she wore, but tonight they were nothing but paper in the rain. "Kai," she started, but her throat closed on the words. He moved closer, just enough that the heat of his body reached hers. "I don't want to dishonor your grief, but every time I see you," his jaw tightened. "It feels like my chest is burning." Her heart thudded, a wild drum. "You can't say these things." "I shouldn't," he admitted, "but I can't stop." The air was thick, charged. If she stepped back, it would break. If she stepped forward, the world would never be the same. Elena closed her eyes, her voice a ragged thread. And if they find out? His hand hovered at her arm but didn't touch. Then I'll carry the weight. Alone, if I must. When she opened her eyes, his gaze was raw, stripped of all his usual quiet strength. For the first time, she saw the boy inside the warrior, the boy who wanted, who feared, who longed. It broke her. It bound her. Her fingers, trembling, brushed the edge of his hand. The touch was small, fleeting, almost nothing, but it was enough to seal something dangerous and unbreakable between them. Neither spoke again. The silence carried everything: the vow, the risk, the hunger that could no longer be buried. And in the silver wash of moonlight, with the desert stretching endless and eternal around them, Elena realized she had crossed a line she could never return from. The next morning dawned with a deceptive calm. The desert horizon glowed faintly pink, the sun pushing against the night like a secret pressing at locked lips. Elena moved through the camp with careful hands, grinding maize, tending fires, braiding her hair with mechanical precision. On the outside, she was steady. Inside, every thought replayed the brush of Kai's hand against hers. It was such a small thing, barely contact, but it lingered like an ember under her skin, refusing to die out. Kai avoided her eyes that day, but not her presence. She felt him everywhere, when he brought wood to the fire pit, when he rode out with the hunters, when he returned with the others at dusk, dust clinging to his boots. His silence wasn't cold. It was taut, stretched thin, as if one word might undo the restraint that kept him tethered. By late afternoon, the camp buzzed with preparation. A visiting band was expected, bringing trade goods and stories. It was an honor, a responsibility. Fires were stoked, mats laid out, children sent to gather mesquite pods. Elena's hands worked quickly, weaving baskets for the meal to come, but her mind, her heart, kept drifting to the night before. As the sun sank and shadows grew long, the visitors arrived. Horses, riders, bundles tied in deerskin. Greetings filled the air, a blend of laughter and formality. Elena stood behind her aunt, quiet, respectful, her shawl drawn tightly over her shoulders. And still, she knew where he was. Always. Kai stood among the young men, his head bowed in welcome, his posture humble, but his gaze flicked to her like an arrow loosed. She didn't meet it, but she felt it pierce straight through. The night stretched on with food and song. The men smoked and told hunting stories, the women passed baskets of roasted corn and berries, children darted between the firelight and shadows. Elena kept her head down, her voice polite when spoken to, and yet she was thrumming, every heartbeat like a drum. She knew Kai was too. When the fires burned low and most had drifted off, Elena slipped away toward the river. She told herself she only needed air, a moment away from the noise. The river's edge shimmered under the stars, the water whispering against smooth stones. She crouched, dipped her fingers into the cool stream, and breathed. Behind her, a step. Soft but unmistakable. Her chest tightened. She didn't turn right away. She didn't need to. "I thought you'd be here," Kai said, his voice low. She rose slowly, the water dripping from her fingers. "You shouldn't follow me." "I didn't follow," he said, stepping closer until the scent of cedar and smoke clung to her senses. "I was drawn." Elena's breath caught. "Do you hear yourself? You speak like," she broke off, shaking her head. "If they knew, they don't." His voice had steel beneath it. "And they won't." She turned to him then, and the sight of him, dark hair unbound, eyes burning under starlight, nearly undid her. "This can't happen." "It already has." The words silenced her. He didn't mean the touch of hands. He meant the pull, the vow written not in words but in glances, in silence, in the way their souls bent toward each other like grass to the wind. "Do you want me to stop?" he asked suddenly, his voice softer now, stripped bare. "Tell me to stop and I will." Her lips parted but no sound came. She should say it. She knew she should. But her heart beat so violently she thought it might tear itself apart. And in that silence, her answer was clear. Kai reached out slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. His hand brushed her cheek, featherlight, reverent. Her skin burned beneath his touch, her breath shallow. "Elena," he murmured, her name tasting like a prayer on his lips. She leaned into him before she realized she'd moved. Their foreheads touched, nothing more, but it was more intimate than any kiss. The river whispered, the stars wheeled overhead, and the world itself seemed to hold its breath. "I should," she whispered. "But you want to." His words weren't arrogant. They were trembling with the same hunger she carried. Her eyes stung with tears she hadn't expected. "If I let this happen, I can't go back." "Neither can I," he said, and so, in that moment, they let it burn. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then fierce, like rain finally breaking after months of drought. It wasn't just a kiss. It was surrender, it was defiance, it was a vow carved into the night. When they pulled apart, breathless, Alina pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the wild drum of his heart. His forehead rested against hers, his voice rough. "Even if the world turns against us, I'll never let go." And though fear coiled tight in her, a different truth bloomed stronger. She didn't want him to let go. The night after their kiss, Alina could not sleep. She lay on her woven mat, staring at the dark ceiling of the wickiup, hearing every shift of wind, every creak of wood. Her lips still burned with the memory of Kai's, her body still trembling with the reckless truth they had shared. Forbidden, dangerous, and yet irresistible. She thought of her mother's warnings, of her aunt's steady eyes watching her every move. She thought of the stories told around the fires, about girls who strayed, about warriors who broke rules, about families torn apart by choices like hers. But she also thought of Kai's voice, low and steady. "Even if the world turns against us, I'll never let go." The dawn came gray and heavy. She moved through her chores like someone caught in a dream, basket in hand, body bending to gather herbs, feet tracing paths without memory. The visiting band was preparing to leave, trading done, goodbyes murmured. The camp seemed lighter with their departure, but Alina felt only the deepening weight of what she carried inside. Kai was different too. He worked without pause, without laughter, his movements sharper, more controlled, as if he feared the truth might spill out of him at any moment. Their eyes met once across the camp, just once, and the world went silent. That was enough to remind her. The fire between them had not gone out. It never would. That night, when most slept, Alina slipped away again. Her feet carried her back to the river. She didn't expect him. She told herself she only needed to breathe, to gather strength. But deep down, she knew, he came. Kai stepped from the shadows, his figure outlined in silver light, his face solemn, almost fierce. "Alina!" She should have run, she should have turned. Instead, she stood, trembling, her shawl clutched tight. "Why do you come?" "Because I can't stay away," he said simply. She swallowed hard. "We'll be found, you know what they'll say." "I know," he said, moving closer, his voice low but unwavering. "But listen to me, if I never speak it aloud, I'll go mad." He paused, searching her face as if for permission. "I love you." The words struck her harder than she had prepared for. Love. Not longing, not desire, not defiance. Love. She shook her head, though tears stung her eyes. "Don't say that. I have to." His chest rose and fell with the force of it. "From the first moment I saw you at the funeral, holding that child with everyone watching, I knew. I tried to fight it. I tried to bury it, but it grew, and it's stronger than me." Her breath came in sharp, uneven waves. "Kai," he reached for her hand, clasping it between his own. "Say you feel nothing, and I'll leave." "I'll never trouble you again." The words caught in her throat. To deny it would be safer, smarter, it would protect them both, and yet her lips betrayed her heart. "I can't," she whispered. Relief and fire washed over his face all at once. He pulled her closer, their hands locked, their foreheads touching again in that quiet vow. "I don't know what will come," he murmured. "They may forbid it, they may cast us out, but let them. My path is chosen. It leads to you." Alina's tears finally fell, but they were not only of fear. They were of release, of surrender, of the freedom in truth. She pressed her palm against his cheek, her voice breaking but steady. "Then we walk it together." The night seemed to close around them, the stars wheeling above like silent witnesses. The river whispered secrets at their feet, and in the quiet, they sealed their vow not with fire or fanfare, but with the simple strength of holding on. For theirs was a love not meant to be flaunted or celebrated. It was born in shadows, tempered by silence, carried in glances and stolen touches. It was forbidden, yes, but it was also unshakable. And though the world might yet rise against them, in that moment, Alina knew, Whatever came, they would face it together.